In the ongoing series on conservation of medicinal plants, till now we have discussed that there has been a significant increase in the demand of herbal products, which has led to enormous pressure on the natural resources, and by virtue of that pressure, various important medicinal plant species are either extinct or vulnerable or endangered or critically endangered. And because of this problem, various global agencies came together and drafted certain guidelines in order to conserve the medicinal plants. And WHO recommended these guidelines, published these guidelines for the global agencies. They also recommended that the national bodies across the globe should also develop their conservation medicinal plants, which has been followed by the agencies of different countries. But by and large, all these guidelines that are framed by different national bodies also, they revolve around the recommended guidelines by the WHO. So in those, we discussed that those guidelines are broadly divided into four major aspects. That is basic knowledge, wherein we collect the knowledge about the targeted medicinal plant species, how it is distributed in a particular geographical area, what is its status, whether the population is sufficient or the population is decreasing significantly because of the human activities or the demand of that particular medicinal plant species. Then second aspect was the utilization of that knowledge, how the knowledge that has been gathered by the first aspect can be utilized in order to draft a policy, draft a strategy to conserve that particular medicinal plant, how we can promote the cultivation of that particular medicinal plant, how we can improve the cultivation practices or the methods of that particular medicinal plant. So all that we discussed under the utilization aspect. Then we started with the conservation aspect of the medicinal plant, wherein the information that was gathered in the first aspect, the strategies that were made in the second aspect, how these can be utilized to conserve that particular medicinal plant. And we discussed that the methods used to conserve the medicinal plant can be broadly categorized into in situ methods and ex situ methods. In situ methods were those wherein the plant was conserved in its natural habitat, where it is growing naturally or under wild conditions. And for that, a policy at the national level on the conservation and utilization of medicinal plants in protected areas shall be prepared, and this largely included the development of the national park across different geographical areas. These guidelines also suggested under in situ conservation that the concerned department should assess the extent to which the protected area system covers the medicinal plants of the country, whether all the medicinal plant species have been covered in that particular area, with a major aim. The national parks of a country are developed with a major aim that the species, whether it is flora or fauna, almost all the species should be conserved, should be protected from exploitation. Then the concerned department should devise economic and social incentives for maintaining natural habitat and wild species. So as we discussed that strategies should be formalized, strategies should be developed. These strategies should include certain economic incentives, certain social incentives for the people who are working in conserving those important medicinal plant species, whether those people are the tribal people or the local people who are living in that particular national park that has been designed for the conservation. The park managers should ensure that the conservation and exploitation of medicinal plants are incorporated into site management plans. So whatever strategy that has been made, that should take account of the conservation of that particular species, one, and second, it should also include the exploitation of that medicinal plant, because as I told you in my previous lecture that there are certain people who are living in those national parks and their daily needs are fulfilled by selling certain medicinal plant species. So such people should be allowed to collect those medicinal plant species, but to a limited extent, or the strategies or the managers should devise certain mechanism wherein the people who are relying on those medicinal plant species should not suffer in name of the conservation of the medicinal plant species. So all such aspects should be there in the strategies and the plans that are made for the in situ conservation of the medicinal plants. and the species that are heavily depleted by the overcollection should be reintroduced into the areas where they once grew wild. So the major aim of the in situ conservation, as we discussed, was to conserve the medicinal plant species in their natural habitat. So if a particular species is being depleted by its overcollection, by its overexploitation, either by the commercial suppliers or by the industry, such species should also be reintroduced in those areas, and that can help in the in situ conservation of those particular species, because we are introducing those species in the area where they grew naturally before they were endangered or they got extinct. So these were the few points that covered under the in situ conservation methods. So now we move on to the next aspect of the conservation, that is the ex situ conservation. Now in situ, in means within the natural habitat, ex situ conservation where we conserve a particular species outside its natural habitat. So we are providing the manipulated temperature or the water conditions or the safety conditions to that particular species, and we try to grow that species outside a particular area, outside the natural habitat of that particular species. So ex situ conservation methods, they have their own advantages as well as their disadvantages. So as I told you that these are the methods wherein we grow the plant outside, we conserve the plant outside its natural habitat. So therefore we can say that the ex situ conservation methods, they act as an insurance policy for the medicinal plant species. And when we talk about the insurance policy, that means if a particular medicinal plant species has been declared critically endangered or has been depleted or has got extinct from a particular geographical area, that particular species is being conserved under ex situ conditions, say for example. And since that species has become extinct in its natural habitat, the plants or the germplasm that has been preserved or that has been conserved under ex situ methods, that germplasm or that plant material that is being grown under ex situ conditions can be used to reintroduce that species in its natural habitat. So we can say that these ex situ methods are a sort of backup plan. So if anything goes wrong in the natural habitat, whether there is I will say the destruction of the natural habitat of the plant or any natural calamity occur in that particular geographical area which wipes out that particular species, so we can reintroduce that species from the germplasms or the plant samples that have been conserved under ex situ conservation. So that's why we call these methods as an insurance policy. Now these ex situ conservation methods, they also help in easy supply of the plant material for propagation. Cultivation is one of the most important method of or the way of conserving the medicinal plant species. We have already discussed the importance of cultivation. So if we want certain specific material for the propagating or for cultivating that particular medicinal plant species, these ex situ conservation methods or ways can provide that material for the propagation, whether that propagation material is in the form of germplasm or the seeds or any non-vegetative, non-sexual method of propagation is there, then it also provides us the material. So since it helps in providing us the material, it acts as a backup plan for conserving the species, for protecting the species. These ex situ methods always help in reintroduction of those species into their natural habitat. They also help in providing the material for agronomic improvements. And as I told you that these ex situ methods which we are going to discuss ahead, they have certain experts hired to conserve these species, and these experts, they also help in improving the agricultural techniques, in optimizing, I will say, in optimizing the agricultural methods for those species. So if that particular medicinal plant species has to be reintroduced in its natural habitat or it has to be introduced under cultivation, they should also provide the optimized cultivation method to the cultivators or to the farmers who want to grow that particular medicinal plant species. Then these ex situ conservation methods, they also provide the plant material for research and education purposes. As I told you that these under ex situ conservation various experts are hired, so they can work they can perform the research experiments on these medicinal plant species that are conserved under ex situ conditions. And these research activities either can be to gain further knowledge about the taxonomy of that particular species, to gain further knowledge about the phytochemistry, that is what type of chemical constituents are present in that particular species, whether that particular species has any therapeutical or medicinal value or not, or they can further I will say find out a new medicinal use of that particular medicinal plant species for which that species can be further conserved. Now these ex situ conservation methods are also helpful for the education purposes, because they are a major source of educating the local people, the young mind, about the importance of the medicinal plant, about the importance of conservation of the medicinal plant, and vis-a-vis they also help in sensitizing those people towards the conservation of these medicinal plants. So these were the few advantages of the ex situ conservation methods. Now we move on to certain disadvantages. Now, as I told you that these ex situ methods are largely rely on conserving the medicinal plant species outside their natural habitat. Therefore, we provide them suitable environment for the medicinal plant to grow. And when we are growing the medicinal plant under human care or human protection by providing the suitable environment, gradually there is a decrease in genetic variation of that particular species in comparison when that species was growing under natural conditions or in the wild conditions. Because we know that the natural conditions or the wild conditions, they keep on changing, there is a large variation in those conditions, and in order to adapt to these conditions, the plant has to undergo various kind of genetic modifications over the period of time, and these genetic modifications help the plant to adapt itself against those climatic variations or any condition that is suitable for the cultivation, any variation in the conditions that are required for its natural growth. So over the period of time, we will observe a genetic depletion in case of the plants that are being conserved under the ex situ methods. Then species can also suffer from genetic erosion. When we talk about genetic erosion, it means, as I told you, that there are certain species which are conserved under ex situ conditions, and under ex situ conditions we provide them all the suitable environmental conditions for their proper growth, and by virtue of those continuous provision of those suitable conditions, the genes that were responsible for the adaptation of the plant under variable conditions, they slowly get ineffective, and gradually those genes are lost in the plant, lost from the plant genome, because now the plant don't require those genes to adapt itself toward variable climatic conditions, because under ex situ methods you are providing the most suitable optimized climatic conditions for the growth of that plant. So in this way the genetic erosions or the genetic drift occurs in the plant species which are conserved by the ex situ methods. And as we discussed, these kind of species, they largely depend upon the continuous human care. So if you want to reintroduce these medicinal plant species into their natural habitat, still you have to provide certain human care up to a certain extent in order for the plant material to adapt those natural conditions. So they, by and large, we can say they largely require human growth, human care for their proper growth, and therefore it is always recommended that ex situ conditions or the ex situ methods should not replace, but they should complement the in situ conservation methods. Now we will move on to the various ex situ conservation, why it is being done. So in ex situ conservation, priority should be given to the species whose habitats may have been destroyed or cannot be safeguarded. So those species who were once growing naturally in their natural habitat, and if their natural habitat has been destroyed either due to natural calamity or due to the extensive human expansive activities, where that those particular geographical areas cannot be safeguarded from the human activities, such kind of species can be conserved under the ex situ methods. And yes, again I will repeat that these ex situ conserved species should always complement the in situ conserved species or the in situ conservation methods. Then practices to bulk up population of the depleted or even locally extinct plants for restocking in nature should be designed and followed. So as we discussed, the major aim of ex situ conservation method should be the reintroduction and rebuilding of the population in their natural habitat. So they are always act as a backup plan for the conservation of the medicinal plant species, and the major aim is that we should always try to conserve the species in their natural habitat. And yes, these ex situ methods can act as a source for the supplying of the plant material for the reintroduction into the natural habitat. Now, what are the various methods for ex situ conservation? These can be botanical gardens. These are the seed banks, wherein large amount of germ plasms, which are always in the form of seeds, they can be stored. And the major advantages of seed banks is that you can store large amount of seeds of different species in a very small place. Then there are certain species whose seed cannot withstand the storage condition, who cannot withstand the dehydrative conditions, and for such plants we require field gene banks. And the fourth one is the cryopreservation, and this is the most upcoming technique by which you can conserve the medicinal plant species. You can conserve the germ plasm, you can conserve a particular tissue, you can preserve particular culture of a specified or the targeted medicinal plant species under deep freezing conditions. We are going to discuss all these techniques ahead. So first and the foremost technique is the setup of the botanical gardens, and for this it is recommended that each country should have at least one functioning botanical garden in their country. If we go back in time and look into the existence or the development of botanical gardens, it has been found that these botanical gardens, or the concept of botanical garden, is almost 3000 years old, and the most primitive botanical gardens are found in Egypt and Mesopotamian region. But if we talk about the modern definition of botanical garden, and if we want to classify the botanical garden on the basis of modern definition, then modern botanical gardens, they came into existence in somewhat 16th or 17th century in Europe. And the initial mandate or the aim of the botanical garden was more or less of the educational purpose, because the people who were working in the field of medicinal plant or in the apothecaries where the drugs based on plants were prepared, so these botanical gardens were developed with the major target on those people, and therefore they were having more or less the educational role. Gradually these medicinal or the botanical gardens, they basically became part of certain universities. Certain universities start developing their own small botanical gardens. Apothecaries, they also start developing their own botanical gardens. But by and large, they were having mainly the educational role. And today, if we talk about, there are around 1800 botanical gardens in around 148 countries across the globe. Now, looking into the role of the botanical gardens, the important role of botanical gardens in order to conserve the species, or if we talk about their educational role, IUCN, they created a society which is known as Botanic Garden Conservation International, in order to encourage the work of botanical gardens for conservation of medicinal plants, vis-a-vis for educating people about the conservation of medicinal plants. And today, if we talk about, there are around 300 gardens which are member of this Botanic Garden or Botanical Garden Conservation International Society. Now, what are the major roles of botanical gardens? Why these botanical gardens are so important in the ex situ conservation methods? So, the major roles are in the horticulture and cultivation skills. So, as I told you that majority of the botanical gardens, they have experts of the medicinal plants, whether in terms of their agricultural methods, experts are there, whether experts want to study about their chemical composition, for that experts are there, if the experts want to study about the genetic makeup of the plant species, for such studies experts are there. So all kind of amalgamation of these experts are there in botanical gardens, and therefore these experts work hand in hand to develop certain optimized agricultural or the horticultural skills or the techniques, so that if the person or if the cultivator wants to cultivate a particular medicinal plant species, they can provide the optimized condition for the cultivation for that particular species, because every species has its own character. So every species require a separate optimized horticultural or the cultivation method. So these botanical gardens or the experts in the botanical gardens, they provide all such informations to the cultivators, and as we discussed, the cultivation itself is a very important source of conservation of these medicinal plants. Now, these botanical gardens also helps in the research and development of on the medicinal plants, because as we discussed, various experts are there in the botanical gardens. They study about the plant taxonomy. There are, because in my previous few lectures I have discussed, there are numerous medicinal plant species which have not been studied scientifically. I will say around 75 to 80% species are such whom about them we basically don't know much about them. So there are experts which can study on the genetic makeup of those plant species, what are the genes or what are the genomic makeup of those plants, phytochemical aspects of those plant species, and the uses of those plant species. So these botanical gardens has an important role in the research and development in the field of medicinal plants also. Then comes the educational role. As I told you that these botanical gardens, they have major educational role initially when they came into existence. So we know that various educational institutes, whether they are schools or higher educational institutes, colleges or universities, they organize certain trips towards various botanical gardens, and these experts can educate the young mind, because these young minds are our future. So they can educate the young minds about the importance of these medicinal plants, which are important bioresource for newer drugs. And not only they can tell the importance of these medicinal plants, but they can also sensitize these young mind towards the importance of the conservation of these important bioresources, and therefore these botanical gardens has an important educational role. And not only educational role, but we always link plants with the well-being of the man, and we know that a small visit to a garden in the lap of nature acts as a very good stress buster. So therefore these botanical gardens also play an important role in developing the well-being of a man. Just a small visit to a well-designed botanical garden will make you free from all your worries for some time, obviously, but yes, these act as a very good stress buster. So these are the few roles of botanical gardens wherein they play an important I'll say role in the conservation of medicinal plant, and not only the conservation but also the educational role about the importance of these medicinal plant. And in these botanical gardens we have conservation horticulture, and conservation horticulture is a term that was coined in late 1990s, and this term was designed in order with an aim to highlight the specialized knowledge and practical skills that are required in horticulture, and these techniques or skills are specifically meant for the conservation of rare and threatened plant species. So if a particular medicinal plant species or any plant species which is quite rare in nature now in their natural habitat or is highly threatened, for such kind of species, with the focus on such kind of species, certain horticultural methods or the cultivation methods are developed that fall under the conservation horticulture. Now these development and management of ex situ collections that are genetically diverse and representative of target population in the wild. So these conservation horticultural techniques are basically developed for the medicinal plant species which have great genetical diversity in their natural habitat, but they are quite critically endangered or nearly extinct, and these species represent the particular population of a species of the target species which is targeted for the conservation. And yes, these conservation horticultural techniques, they will provide you the plant material for in situ conservation, for the rebuilding or the reintroduction of those species into their natural habitat. So friends, this was the first method of ex situ conservation, that is botanical garden, and in the subsequent lecture we will discuss about the other ex situ conservation methods, that is seed banks or field gene banks or the cryopreservation. Thank you.